Brittany, I'm going to go here. Now you can see me.
Hi.
I'm Melissa Sande. I'm the Dean of Humanities. Welcome to Union County College. We're so thrilled to have you with us today. We have students coming in and filtering in over the next, there was a class change, so there's a little bit of a time issue. And we have students logged in here on Zoom. And if you have questions and you're logged in, you can feel free to post in the chat. And we'll relay them and ask the author to answer. So thank you for being with us. We're thrilled that your novel is the college novel this year, and the students are really enjoying it. We're very happy to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, Miss Carly, did you want to kick us off?
Yes.
All right. So come here, Laura.
Hi, I'm Carly.
Hi, Carly.
I have two questions. So when you're not working, what do you like doing in your free time?
That's like the best question to start off with. Free time. I'm trying to, no, I really am trying to be much more intentional, Carly, about having that free time. A lot of my free time, I just like to rest, sleep, read, watch Netflix and Hulu. I have some favorite shows that I've been able to catch up on lately. But I also really like to travel. And so I'm hoping to be able to pick that back up soon. I've been going in the Smoky Mountains in eastern Tennessee. So I'll be going back there in 2 weeks, staying for a week and just really just enjoying stillness.
Okay, and my second question is, what bothers you the most while you're working?
What bothers me the most?
Yeah.
Everyone, I guess when people feel that their sense of urgency should be your sense of urgency.
Okay.
So just because something is an emergency on your end and you need it right now doesn't mean that that's a priority for me. So I think people are becoming more and more impatient, but I think a lot of us are also being very intentional about not perpetuating that cycle. If I get an email and I'm working on something,
Recording in progress.
then I won't stop, to just answer that email. I'll finish what I'm doing, I'll finish my task at hand, and then I'll come back around. So really setting the tone and setting those boundaries for others with that sense of urgency, because everyone perceives it differently.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Those were great questions to start us off.
Anyone else? There's one in the chat. Let's see. Okay, so Alex is asking, what gave you the idea to make a book telling your story about your history and the events you encountered?
Great question, Alex. So, I'll be honest, I never even was on a path to write a book. It's never been something that was on my bucket list or something that I ever knew that I would do. But after going through the journey, many of my clients would say, people need to hear this story. People need to hear your story and our story. And then other people started to talk about it once they would learn about the journey. And so I started to really ponder it more. Maybe I should write a book. And I did. I think a lot of it came from the encouragement of my clients. And once I decided to write it, I tried to always do things with the purest of intention, right? To decide, what's my why? Why am I doing this? Why would I write a book? Why would I tell this story? And for me, the why was to tell the truth. I wanted to tell the truth about racial injustice that bleeds through America's criminal legal system. I wanted to tell the truth about the people, the heartbeats, the people who are locked in America's cages. I wanted to share their brilliance and beauty and, really perpetuate the truth in that way. And I wrote the book for a third reason too. I wrote the book for young girls to be able to dream their biggest dreams. and to know that the sky is not the limit. It could be the starting point. So I really just wanted to encourage others to follow their dreams.
Thank you. Let's see. We have Abdul. He says, I know from our perspective, we can definitely see your message and vision on this book. What would you say sparked in you? What would you say was the spark that, helped you create this book? I think that's what Abdul wants to say.
Yeah, I think I would answer very similar to the last question, that it was my clients. Okay. It was really my clients to encourage me, really encourage me to write it.
Awesome. Okay, so we have Benjamin. He's saying good afternoon. He says, I have 2 questions in regards to your novel, A Knock at Midnight. What was the hardest scene to write?
It was really chapters 1 through 5, my childhood, and reliving through writing those times when my mother, her addiction was at its worst, and reliving that from my, 4th grade, 5th grade mind. That was the hardest of them all to write. I think the hardest scene to write in those chapters was the scene, I don't know if you all recall, where I described my mother sitting on the couch during her addiction when she was high. And I cried all the way through that. I still cry reading that scene because I knew I wanted to be very raw and transparent with the reader. But I knew I also wanted to protect my mama and her beauty. So I tried to really write that scene in a way that people could relate, but also in a way that honored her as a person who just so happened to have an addiction. And so that was definitely the hardest scene to write. Other places that were difficult for me to write is, as you all know, we are living in this society where criminal justice reform is a hot topic. It's fashionable, it's popular, but we still have such a long way to go as it relates to really humanizing this issue, to really centering the human element and shifting the narrative to change the paradigm. And what I mean by that is just how important language is in this space. And so there are lots of times where we listen to directly impacted people. We're always encouraging them to lead us in this space, and how words hurt and dig. And so we really work really hard in this space, and I did in my book, to use people-centered language. So you won't see the word inmate in my book unless it's in dialogue, because it is not a people-centered word, and people in prison and formerly incarcerated people are not really fans of it. They want to push more towards, instead of being an inmate, being a man in prison or a woman in prison or people in prison. You also would see me really being very careful with the words that I use, because language is so powerful, and we are trying to shift that narrative to even one word in one sentence could literally shift the perspective of anyone reading it in a good or a bad way. And so that was challenging for me. I wanted to be sure that I was very careful, with every sentence, every word, every punctuation mark. I was very intentional about that.
Thank you. The second part of his question is, what do you think is the best way to improve writing skills?
Oh, wow, there's so many. So I'll give you some from my experience. And there's ways that you probably wouldn't think too. I think one of the best ways to improve writing skills is environment. being in a space that taps into your creativity. So for me, that's being near water, whether it's the ocean or a lake, that's being in mountains, that's being in a room with a lot of natural lighting. So that is like something that we often don't think about when we think about improving writing skills, but your environment really plays a huge part in that. Also, for others, writers' conferences help. For me, reading lots of books actually helps improve my writing skills. And I've heard a lot of other authors say the same thing. You'll notice a lot of authors read a lot of books, and it's really a way to help improve writing skills. And then just taking scene by scene. So it's more than just writing the scene of me visiting Sharonda Jones in prison, but it's more about putting the reader in that scene with you. So that's when you start to talk about smells and feelings and sounds and, the weather and the smells from the visitation room, the feel of the chair you were sitting on in the visitation room, things like that. So really putting the reader in scene, because you want the reader to feel as if they are there with you.
Thank you. So we have a student in-house with a question.
Hi, my name is Pierre. My question
Hi.
Hi. My question is, what was your favorite and least favorite part about writing a book?
I couldn't hear the question all the way. My favorite.
Yeah, your favorite and your least favorite.
I can't understand the question. I'm sorry. I can't hear from the microphone.
What was your favorite and least favorite part about writing the book?
So my favorite part was finishing. No, really, it was really I realized, because it's my first book, right? So it's my first time going through that experience. And not that I didn't appreciate authors before, but I have a newfound respect and appreciation for them. So my favorite part of it was the art. It is an art. It's a craft, to write a book. So that piece for me just helped me be creative in ways that I haven't been able to be, because I'm working on getting people out of prison and I'm building nonprofits. So the art of writing a book was my favorite part. My least favorite, it was actual writing. So I've always been a good writer, but I don't really enjoy writing, if that makes any sense. And so I would find myself writing and sitting at my laptop typing out for 3 hours, and I would have typed like 4 sentences. Maybe some of you can even relate. And I was just like, this is not gonna work. Like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to write a book at this pace. And I went to speak to a mentor of mine about it. And he said, Brittany, you are searching in the dark for a key to a door that's wide open. He said, you're a good speaker. You're a good orator. You should speak the book. And so I went from feeling as if I was scratching concrete at my laptop to having a friend of mine interview me about my story. And we would record our interview sessions. And so, if I said that I was working at Oryx on a corporate deal, she'd want to know, what was the dialogue surrounding me? What were people wearing? How was I feeling that day? And we recorded all of that to where we had over 40 hours of audio that we had transcribed. And that really helped get going. So now I went from writing 3 sentences in 3 hours to just speaking it and flowing and narrative form and having hundreds of pages to work with. So that the writing part was honestly part of my least favorite. I had to find what worked for me to get the story on the page. And initially that was speaking it. And after that, then it helped really get into the nitty gritty of writing.
All right. Thank you.
Anyone else in house? Come on, sir. Introduce yourself and then ask. Go ahead.
Hello, good morning. My name is Emmanuel, and I'll be asking you one question regarding your childhood and how it impacted you being an attorney. So the question is, like, your childhood has been very difficult compared to the number of children living in this modern time. So you grew up in a difficult childhood. So my question is, would your life have been any different in terms of you not being an attorney or not going into a higher education if drugs and mass incarceration were not involved in your childhood environment?
I don't know that my life would have been different. Like, I think that if mass incarceration and drugs were not involved, I still would have gone to college. I still would have been successful in that way because that's just innately who I was. So I wouldn't say that my life would have been different in that aspect. I do feel the trajectory of my life and the way I perceived my life and the experiences I was having would have been a lot different because I was impacted by mass incarceration. My life was impacted by drugs. It gave me a different perspective on how I viewed the world and how I view people who we are often taught to stereotype and ignore. And those are people who are in prison because my mother was one of them, and so it just really brought me very proximate to it, really shifted my perspective on how I viewed that population of people and just life in general. So that is a really, really great question.
And also I had one more question. So since the drug issue is such a big problem in the US, and since you spoke so much about it in your book, did you ever think about creating a movie out of it?
A movie?
Yes.
I have thought about creating a movie out of it. We're actually hopefully in the works of a movie or a TV series right now. So hopefully there'll be a great announcement coming soon, that I can share with everyone about that. But yes, I have definitely thought about it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Come on. Yes, those are good questions.
Hello.
Hi.
I had 2 questions for you. My name is
Okay.
Anna, by the way.
Hi.
If you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would it be?
My younger writing self,
Yeah.
to embrace writing more. My dad would really encourage me when I was younger to embrace it. As I mentioned, I've always been a pretty good writer, but I just didn't like it. And my dad would try to encourage me to not look at it from that aspect. If you're approaching something of saying I don't like it versus I love this and I'm gonna embrace it, it's just totally different in the way that you move in life, And so I think I went through life a lot of like, oh, I just do not like writing. And so every writing assignment I had was just challenging in the sense that I just begrudged it versus just embracing it more. So, now that I'm older, I try to really shift my mentality in that way and just embrace it, writing more, or embrace it in a way that will help me, further evolve as a writer, which for me, as I mentioned, was speaking. So even now, I still, if I'm writing an op-ed or something like that, I'll still speak it first and record myself speaking it and then transcribe it and then write from there.
Nice. I had another question. What type of professional and personal skills does it take to succeed at this type of work that you do?
Personal and professional?
Yes.
So we'll start with the professional first. Definitely deep analytical skills, being able to analyze issues in depth, being able to see things others may not see. Leadership skills with writing, as we just talked about, just being very clear and concise in the writing. In other words, getting to the point very quickly. Legal research skills are just critical in the work that I do. I would also say, just that ability to be able to lead in a way where your entire team feels empowered, where your entire team feels that they are part of a team and they are helping you work towards the greater good. A lot of my success would not be possible if I didn't just have really great people around me to help me along the way. Personally, the skills, I would say, definitely a lot of soft skills that include just being a thoughtful, conscious listener. That's like number one, especially with my clients, just being able to listen to them. A lot of times people will be surprised at how far that goes with people who are in prison, to just know that someone is listening. We haven't even gotten to the work yet of getting them free, but just what it does for their spirit to know someone is listening and cares. So definitely good listening skills and patience. That's really key with not only the work that I do, but just life in general, especially with the work that I do as it relates to, once we file our motions with the courts, everything else is out of our control. And so being patient, going back to my point from the beginning of the talk, that everyone's sense of urgency is not mine, and all of my sense of urgency is not everyone else's, so that patience is really key.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Brittany, I'm going to ask you a question from the chat from Zachary.
Okay.
How were you able to cope with your mother's incarceration?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. And I like that, Zachary, that you did use the word cope, because it really ties to trauma, and it is a very traumatic experience to be incarcerated and to have a loved one incarcerated. For me, I just have a very strong faith, and I believe just in a power that's bigger than myself. And so I relied on that a lot, to be able to cope during that time. My sister, Jazz, as y'all read about in the book, helped me cope a lot. She has a very carefree spirit. And so just laughter with her on the way to visit my mom, I don't think she will ever know how much that helped me. And also just seeing my mother's transformation in prison helped me cope, because I knew that meant this was a time where she was on this remarkable path of redemption, for lack of a better term. So those were things that really, really helped me cope.
How you doing? My name is Gilbert.
Hi.
Now my question was, my question was, what was your anchor? Like, I guess you could say it like that. Like, what kept you down? Not down, but like, what kept you in a good mood when everything was going on? Like your anchor.
What was my anchor?
Yeah.
My anchor was knowing deep down that with the work that I was doing, just really knowing and believing that I was being used in some way as a vessel for the greater good. So my anchor was knowing, again, that the work that I was doing was much bigger than myself. That same anchor can also be heavy, literally and figuratively, because it could come with carrying this responsibility and this obligation that can feel like a weight or a burden that shouldn't be there. But I think that just goes back to just harnessing the power of our minds to know that what each one of us is doing, no matter what, it should all be related to the greater good. And so that was a key anchor for me, is remembering that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so Isabel from the chat, she wants to know, what is your point of view on the war on drugs?
Well, my first point of view is that it was not as much of a war on drugs as it was a war on people of color and poor people, and a war on families and entire communities. I feel that the war on drugs was and is an absolute and utter failure that cost people their lives, that cost taxpayers billions and billions of dollars. And I feel that when we even use terms like war, that we're already starting on a foot that is counterproductive. If it should be more looked at as it is today, if you noticed with the opioid crisis, it's looked at as a public health issue, and it is a public health issue. But unfortunately, when the war on drugs was at its height, it was definitely a war on people of color and poor communities, in a way where even at the height of the crack epidemic, people on crack were criminalized and demonized and vilified in a way that we don't see today. And that is very unfortunate. I wish that the war on drugs would looked a little more similar to how we're treating the opioid epidemic right now. There are still people in prison. There are still families suffering from the height of the war on drugs. And there weren't billions of dollars being poured into rehabilitation. There weren't billions of dollars being poured into alternative drug courts and things of that nature. And so there's this equity issue at play. And so I think the war on drugs was just devastating across the board, whether you look at it from an economic perspective or a moral perspective.
Thank you. I wanted to give a comment from Shemeka in the chat. She wanted to say hello, and that it was wonderful to put a face to the name.
Oh, hi. Thanks for reading.
Yeah, and then so a question from Lindsay. She says, hello, what advice would you give someone who's obsessed with writing but scared to share their stories?
I would say, Lindsay, that to remember that no one can tell your story better than you. And each one of us has such a unique story, such a unique perspective, that it is a gift to the world. And it's a gift that you're sharing with the world, because you would be so surprised at how many people are also scared to share their stories, but how your story could help inspire them in so many ways to share their own story, or just to know they're not alone in whatever life experiences are there. But the main thing is to channel that fear into the passion of knowing that no one can tell their story better than you.
Thank you. Henry in the chat, he says, you mentioned use of language. What were some of the deliberate linguistic choices you made in writing A Knock at Midnight?
So I really, as I mentioned, used a lot of people-centered language. So I already talked about the word inmate. I don't say felon. I'm not saying offender. If you see any of those words, as I mentioned, is used to describe a policy or It's using dialogue that someone else said. So I was really intentional about that. Also, another deliberate linguistic choice was being very deliberate not to use the term nonviolent when it relates to my clients. Even though there was no violence in their cases, as I listened to justice impacted people and some who were convicted of violent crimes, using that nonviolent violent distinction is very divisive. And it really shows it serves no purpose, honestly. I mean, when we think about it, I mean, what is a violent drug crime? It's either, I mean, if it was a violent drug crime, then there would be different charges than just drugs. There would be assault or murder or robbery, but it's a drug charge. So there's really no need for that distinction, but also just using it in a way or making sure we're not being divisive in this space, which means making sure we're not saying one type of crime is more deserving of mercy than another. Because also with the way the laws are written on the federal level and on the state level, sometimes that violent crime characterization is very subjective. I mean, just being caught with a gun on your possession that you've never used in a threatening manner could be considered a violent crime. And so because the definition of what even constitutes a crime of violence is so subjective, it's just best to steer away from things like that. And so I was very deliberate about that. I was also very deliberate about really just showing beauty in different ways, whether it was describing my mom, whether it was describing Sharonda's laugh and how she kept those recipes close to her chest and wouldn't share with anyone, really just being deliberate in making my clients and my family whole people, just like all of us, which they are. But I really wanted to show that on the page. I wanted the readers to feel the heartbeats on every single page of the book.
Thank you. Shemeka, after greeting you earlier, she actually has a question. She says, how did you feel once you wrote your book?
Oh, relieved. I was so happy. It took me 2 years to write the book. So, and all the while I was still working. So relief was number one. Being grateful for the ability, for the opportunity to be able to write the book. And then I got scared, honestly, of like, oh, wow, I wrote a book. My whole story is going to be read, by a lot of people, and just knowing how transparent I was in the book, or even thinking if people would like it, how would it be perceived, those thoughts that I really had to overcome quickly. But it was a roller coaster of emotions. I think the overarching feeling was just deep gratitude.
Okay, great. All right, so we have like a 3-part question here. So okay. The part 2 is, how has it been to witness the changes in the war on drugs from a child to present day?
Disappointing, underwhelming. I feel like even though there have been some progress, not much has changed. I feel that we have so much more work to do, and it's just mind-boggling to me sometimes about how quickly the laws were passed in the late 80s to implement mandatory minimums, to implement that 100-to-1 ratio between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, how that was done so fast with little to no legislative history, but how now we're expected to just accept that we can only get incremental change, that we can only be fed these crumbs and we should be happy. because change takes so long. And I understand that, but it's also contradictory to the change that happened in the late 80s when the law was passed. It didn't happen incrementally. The 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act wasn't in increments. You know, it was all at once, and it was sweeping, and it was devastating, and it caged lives and stole futures. And so, you know, I've been encouraged by the progress, but underwhelmed by it at the same time.
Thank you. So another one from the chat. This is from Professor Afshani. She wants to know more about the process of writing this book. So how long it took and how you developed the chapters.
Yeah, so it took me 2 years. And as I mentioned, I described the start of it already, how I tried to write and how it just wasn't my lane. I mean, I know people that can sit down and knock out a whole chapter, you know, of a book in an hour, in 2 hours. I'm not one of those people. So my process really had to be from the beginning, figuring out what was going to work for me. And so after speaking the book, having it transcribed to writing and having chunks of the story on the page, that was very helpful for me. When I submitted my book proposal initially to the publishers, it did not include what is currently chapters 1 through 5. I had no plans of digging into my childhood in that way. Of course, I was going to talk about my mother had gone to prison, but I had no plans of really digging into my early life in that way. And so that really evolved, because once the book proposal was sold, the publishers really felt the readers would want to know and should know, you know, more about what shaped and molded me to do this work. And so that is how those chapters developed. The other side of it was really figuring out which core clients I was going to talk about, what core topics, like overarching topics I would talk about, and then really work to develop the chapters from there. And so for me, I had a team of 2 women that really helped me a lot. So as I mentioned, one of them was a dear friend of mine. She would interview me. She's a very thoughtful listener. And so she's the one that interviewed all the audio as I would just tell this story. And then another friend really helped me a lot with story arc and character development and things of that nature. So the very first time we just all got in a room together, we spent 2 days, like full days, probably 10 to 12-hour days of just doing whiteboarding sessions, brainstorming. I mean, I still have photos. There's probably 300 sticky notes on the wall of just kind of just going through everything. And then knowing where I was going to start and kind of finding that stopping point of where I was going to finish. And then we created a timeline. So literally I put 1984, the year I was born, going all the way through, you know, 2009, met Sharonda, took critical race theory, met your first visit with Sharonda, first time, you know, introducing these issues to the law school. So after doing that whiteboarding session of kind of going through all the overarching themes I would want, which was justice, love, hope, freedom, and then going from there to do the timeline, that really helped develop the chapters. Just seeing that timeline in one place and kind of knowing the large, or identifying the larger stories from there. I hope that makes sense. It's really not a linear process.
Okay. Thank you. And we have another question from in-house.
Hi, my name is Manuel.
Hi.
And I actually have 2 questions for you. And so for my first question, I would like to preface this by saying that in accordance to your book, you have obviously brought a lot of awareness towards these issues. You have obviously helped a lot of people. And I would just like to ask, to get your perspective, your feelings, your thoughts and how you think, how you've, just a self-evaluation, how you think you've made an impact on addressing these issues. So I would like to ask that: is there any way in which you think your activism has brought any lasting impact towards achieving racial equality in the justice system?
That's a big question. And, a part of me is like, there's so much work to be done. What have I done to make a stamp in it? But I have to, one, we have to celebrate ourselves and the work that we do. And if I think through it from that lens, to answer your question, yes, I do feel that the work that I've done has left a stamp in this movement to transform the criminal legal system. And I'll tell you how I feel the work that I've done has made the biggest stamp. Is because through the over 50 people that myself and my organization have helped free, when we think about how those people are creating systemic change in the way they live their lives and how they're positively impacting anyone they'll meet in the future, the ripple effect of getting one person free, that definitely leaves a big footprint. And so I look at the work that I've done through advocacy and through the law of freeing people as the gateway to really helping them create this splash and this wave that I think will definitely go down in history.
Thank you. And for my final question, I would like to ask, with the people that you helped to pardon, like Donna or Sharonda, how's your relationship with them to this day? I would like to know that, because I'm very interested. Since you helped these people, I'm sure you've obviously have a good relationship with them. Are you friends? Do you stay in touch with them? What's the current situation like?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are family, and we stay in touch all the time. Every person you read about in the book, we stay in touch all the time. I talk to Sharonda every day. She lives down the street from me. She cooks for me all the time. I talk to Donald all the time. He's in trucking now. I'm actually having a dinner. I try to get together with my clients a lot through the year. So we're starting this Manifest Freedom dinner series that we're kicking off in Dallas next week. And so all of them will be there. Sharonda, Donald, Keon will be there. Waylon, Michael, Wilson, they'll all be there. So we definitely keep in touch a lot.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions.
Okay, so we're going to go back to the chat for a bit. Abdul, he wants to know, will there be any more books from you in the near future?
Yes, there will. I think, it's an evolution for me. And so what I'm pondering writing about next is just how my definition of freedom evolved and how that includes, being able to free ourselves too. I talk about a lot as I work to free my clients, they were freeing me too. And that is so true. Mentally, spiritually, just how we all have to be free and how we're all handcuffed and incarcerated in ways that we don't even realize it, whether it's being handcuffed by our own self-limiting beliefs, which is most of it, or whether it's being handcuffed in a way that we're not just being fully present in each and every moment. And so, yeah, I think my next book will likely be along those lines of just this journey of true freedom for myself.
Oh, great. We look forward to it. So Jeff wants to know, he says he's curious, when he read A Knock at Midnight, how did you manage to go to school full-time plus work a full-time job?
Oh, wow. I didn't have a choice. I think I was just doing what I felt I had to do. I don't know if you all recall the scene in the book. I talk about my grandpa a lot, and it was this one scene I talk about in the book that I really carried with me. When I was younger, I was telling him, that my friend had gotten money for every A on her report card. I was like probably fourth grade. And I asked him, I said, I got all A's on my report card. What are you going to give me? And my grandpa looked at me and he said, I'm not going to give you anything. And my little feelings were so hurt, y'all. Like, my grandpa never told me no. And he said after that, he said, I'm not going to reward you for doing what you're supposed to do. Going to school, getting good grades, that's what you're supposed to do. And so, right, wrong, or indifferent, I think that doing what you're supposed to do mentality just stuck with me in healthy ways and in unproductive ways too. But it was something that I carried when I was going to school full time and working full time, that this is what I was supposed to do, because how else was I gonna survive?
Yeah. Thank you. Valeria, she has a couple of questions for you. She says, how did being in an abusive relationship impact your life? And why did you compare being in an abusive relationship to drug addiction?
Being in an abusive relationship impacted my life in a great way, in ways that were devastating, of even having to endure that at all, let alone enduring that at such a young age. But it also impacted my life in amazing ways, because it taught me a sense of self-worth, and it showed me treatment from a man that I would never, ever, ever tolerate again. And so it gave me this strength, that I never knew that I had, to not only remove myself from the situation, but it also just being able to remove myself from that situation reinforced my worth and my value and what I would and wouldn't tolerate in the future. And I compared it to drug addiction in my book, because I think there are just so many addictions that we have to toxic situations, and we don't realize they're addictions. But when we think through it of the lens of how we keep going back and back and back, even though we're going back to the same thing, whether it's drinking coffee that I'm drinking every day. I mean, it's going to Starbucks every day. Of course, the actual catalyst is different than drugs, but an addiction is an addiction. And so I think I compared it to addiction to an abusive relationship, because for some reason during that time, like, I felt that I just had to keep going back, even though I was going back for more of the same. And so it was really showing that, in a way, comparing it to my mom's situation, that we all have our own vices, and we all have to find the strength within ourselves to overcome it. Not making an excuse for his actions at all, but I'm responsible for mine. And that action of mine was to quit going back and to leave.
Thank you. You got some claps in the chat, so you appreciate that. Yes. So the next question from Valeria, she says, how were the families of your clients impacted by having loved ones incarcerated with long sentences?
Oh, just imagine being a young girl like Clanisha, as full of potential as any other young girl. And then just imagine that your mother is in prison, and that feeling of no one around you understanding. So part of the largest impact is that sense of loss, that sense of loneliness. There is something that we don't describe it in this way a lot. I don't describe it in this way a lot, but it's true. Sharonda Jones was sentenced to life without parole. So you have a mother that's present every day, every single day of her daughter's 8 years on this earth, who is now not only removed from her daughter's presence every day, but she's now being removed and banished forever. And with that, for families, for children of incarcerated parents, it's like a death almost, how there's this grieving process. And even though the person's very much alive, their loss from the free world is still grieved. And we all handle grief in different ways. And I think that that's part of the trauma that we have to work to help heal when it comes to directly impacted people, is understanding the different emotions that come with incarceration, the different forms of trauma, from loneliness to abandonment to shame to guilt to grief. I don't know that grief is included a lot in that healing process. And so that impact is definitely devastating. And, you know, I mentioned in the book, but one mother, you know, she described it for her son as a death. You know, it's a living death sentence. And it's really hard. You know, I remember, even though my mother had addiction, she showed up at every major event of my life. And for her not to be at my college graduation when I was getting a master's degree, and knowing that not only was she not there, but she couldn't be there, it was horrible. There was such a void there. And then knowing I'm on the outside feeling this way. And after I talked to her later, you know, she's inside on her cot in a concrete cell in a fetal position, just unable to move for a couple of days because she couldn't be there, and feeling she let me down, and only even getting up out of her bunk to go because she had to go to work, you know, for free, because you don't get paid in Texas prisons. And so there's a lot of trauma that comes with having loved ones incarcerated with long sentences. There's also a lot of responsibility too, of ensuring your loved ones are taken care of in prison, including sending them money for their commissary, ensuring that they stay an active part of our lives, that we're able to go visit, having constant visitations, having consistent communication. And unfortunately, with people who are in prison for long periods of time, you know, a lot of that support falls off. It's almost like an out of sight, out of mind mentality.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Brianna wants to know, was there ever a time that you lost your faith and thought you couldn't do anything more than what you've already done?
I won't say that I lost it completely, but I will say that it waned. Yeah, absolutely. I feel, you know, as James Baldwin talks about, I think it's in The Fire Next Time, but he talks about how we a lot of times have to get up and reimagine hope every day. And I think that's what happened with me, you know, with hope and faith, of just having times where, you know, that hope I just held on to and it was at its highest level, and having times when that hope I still held on to, but it was at its lowest level, and having to just reimagine that hope and faith every day, whether it was reimagining it through hearing Sharonda's laugh on the other side of the phone, whether it was reimagining it with checking my emails and finding an email from Chris Young about quantum physics, whether it was reimagining that hope with just talking to Clinisha. You know, I think that faith and hope, it definitely was at its highest at times and lowest at times, but I always held on to it with a lot of conviction in my heart, even though there were days that I had to wake up and just reimagine it through some form.
Thank you. Wild has a question in the chat. Do you feel like there is a sense of burden of not only advocating for change, but having the judicious duty to inform, the generation coming up that there is a fight as well? As respected as you are, I'm trying to read it like this. Your contribution alone is still a long way from change. The individuals aren't the issue, it's the system.
Yeah, so do I feel a sense of burden? Yeah, absolutely. It's heavy. This work is very heavy, of being able to advocate for change, but also informing, the current generation. As you mentioned, that there's still a fight. And I wholeheartedly agree. One person can make a difference, but one person cannot change systematic issues. I think for me, individuals aren't the issue. It is the system, but we have to get individuals free while the system slowly churns to change. The individual shouldn't have to remain incarcerated for decades while we wait for laws to change. I think part of the solution with this is the way I approach it is it's not a one or the other. Freedom is multidimensional, and freedom has to come from all ways. It's definitely has to be through various dimensions, getting people out of prison one at a time, focus on changing laws and policies and transforming systems. It all has to occur simultaneously in order for real impact to happen, because even with some of the progress we've seen lately, it takes years for these laws to change, and as we wait, we still have to work on freedom through whatever other way is there. So I think we have to do both. We have to focus on the individuals to get them out. We got to do it one at a time, and we also have to focus on the systematic issues. So yeah, definitely still have a long way to go. Definitely one person cannot transform the system by himself or by herself. And we definitely have to continue to look at freedom multidimensionally.
Thank you. So Brittany, we're at the halfway point, and you've answered a lot of questions, and there's still 24 left in the chat. Do you want to take a break, like a glass of water or something?
Yeah, I'll get some water, maybe just like a 2-minute break.
Yes. That makes sense. All right. Okay, everyone,
All right,
we're going to take a little break.
Okay.
All righty.
Hi, how you doing?
There we are.
How you doing, Brittany? My question to you is, at what point in your life did you realize that you had to write the book?
What point did I what?
Like, at what point in your life do you realize where you had to write the book?
It was once my clients encouraged me to do so.
All right. Well, that's
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so back to the chat. Bianca wants to know, were your family supportive?
Oh yeah, very supportive. Even with writing the book, I knew if I was going to write it, as I mentioned before, I had to tell the story in its most pure, authentic form. If I was going to tell it, I had to tell the whole truth. And I went to my mom and dad, for permission, to share our stories in that way, because I'm sharing my mother's story with addiction and my dad's story with addiction. And they were both so incredibly supportive. It was just heartwarming. My mother, she was saying, yes, feel free to tell my story at my worst, because I'm hoping it can help someone else, know they could overcome. And so that was just very encouraging for me, but still, even when it was written, so I went and got permission before I started really writing. So once it's written and you have all those truths on the page, I was still nervous. I wasn't as nervous to share with my dad as I was with my mom. And so I sent her chapters 1 through 5. in a rough draft, and I was on pins and needles. She took off work that day. She printed all the chapters out, and she took off work to sit home and read it. And she called me late that evening. I'm on pins and needles all day. I'm like, oh, she gonna be mad. She about to curse me. What's about to happen? And when I answered the phone, she was crying so hard. She was bawling. And I was like, uh-oh. And through her tears, she said, Britt, this is beautiful. And in that moment, I knew that this is gonna be good, and this is gonna help other families who've gone through what we have to know that there is light.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff has a very interesting question. He says, as teenagers, we tend to be curious of our surroundings. Did you ever think about trying drugs?
As a teenager, I definitely did try cannabis. As it relates to harder drugs, as they would call them, absolutely not. I never did.
Good.
Even today, as an adult, I've never tried any other drug.
Good. Demetrios, he wants to know: are you pleased with how the book has done, and how many people have been able to read it?
Yes, I'm just grateful. My gratitude is definitely runs deep. It has surpassed my wildest expectations. That's for sure.
Good. He has a follow-up. Are there any changes you wish you could make to the book today?
Other than wishing, everyone was free, that I could write about that part. No, I'm very happy with the finished product.
Good. All right. Shruti says, hi, and have you ever been in a situation when you did something in overconfidence and then regret what you've done?
Hi. I'm sure there have been times I've done something in overconfidence of the moment, meaning prematurely than when it should have been done. I didn't regret it. I really have worked very hard over the years of my life to not regret anything. I did learn a lot from it and try to find lessons, in everything that I've done. And some of those things are, I wouldn't even be saying it was overconfidence. I just always believe in the work that I do. And so if I'm filing a motion for a client to be released from prison, I really believe they're going to be free. I wouldn't say it's too much belief or too much confidence in it. We just can't predict, the outcome ever. And so some of those things would be more like filing for clemency. I filed for clemency for Charles Duke Tanner, one of my clients, and he was denied. So I wouldn't say I filed it in overconfidence or regretted filing it, but I would say there was a lesson learned in filing it. And to that point, I hadn't lost any. And the lesson learned in that was that, you win some, you lose some. And I just have to keep fighting, and gratefully, Charles Duke Tanner is free today. And, that's a blessing.
Good. So Getro, he says, good afternoon. I have a question. What is it like to represent people who thought they would be in prison for life?
Oh, that's a great question. It has been one of my life's greatest joys. It has been very perspective shattering for me, because even as I described in the book, when I first went to visit Sharonda, I didn't know what to expect. I was really nervous I had never met someone who was serving life without parole, who was set to die in prison. and just wondering what I would get from her. I was nervous for sure, but it was perspective shattering because what I got was a woman whose smile lit up the prison visitation room. What I got was a woman whose positive energy was so contagious that it really just rolled onto anyone she encountered. You know, what I got was a woman who refused to be defeated by this life sentence. And so it's been perspective shattering in many ways because I've met some of the most brilliant people of my life through the work that I do, and they've been my clients. And being able to represent them has been a beautiful experience. And that beauty, it doesn't just all come because everything has been peaches and cream. That beauty comes because there are hard times, there are challenging times, and there are victorious times. And all of that together just creates this remarkable journey. Because even though my clients, they remain positive and they know they're going to be free, you know, none of us really know how they're going to be free. And so there's always that weight that my clients still have to carry of waking up every day in prison, just facing a reality that would be unbearable for many of us. And so that's, you know, a glimpse into what it's like, you know, to represent someone who thought they would be in prison for life. I will say too, in your question of people who thought they would be in prison for life, I would honestly say none of my clients actually thought or believed they would be in prison for life. I think their sentences may have dictated they would be in prison for life, but every one of my clients knew somehow, some way, they were going to get out of prison. They were not going to die in prison. And so that was really a beautiful thing to witness as well. But, you know, other than that, my thoughts of representing people with life sentences is, it's just a privilege and an honor, and it's something that I do not take lightly.
Thank you. So Brandon, he wants to know, who is someone who influences you the most?
Oh, wow. It's so many, you know, my mom, my dad, my grandmother, my clients. You know, there's not just one person that I could say influences me the most, because I think that influence depends on the day, you know, but everyone definitely plays their role. But definitely a relationship that I hold near and dear is my relationship with my dad. My dad's wisdom and guidance is just, it is very influential in my life.
Great, thank you. So we have question from in-house. Yeah. Come on. Yeah. You can. You have to talk in the mic, honey.
Do you feel that you needed to put this out into the world? Like the novel?
Why did I feel?
No, did you feel that like you needed to? Like
Yes, I did. I really did. I felt I needed to tell the truth. You know, I really wanted to tell the truth. I think, as I mentioned, criminal justice reform these days is so popular. It's a hot topic. It's fashionable. But I'm always amazed at just how little we actually know about how the system actually works. And so I wanted to tell the truth about what I had learned about how the system actually works and how it impacted real people, you know, real lives, and do it in a way that protected the dignity and humanity of the people who've been impacted.
And I have a couple questions from one of my classmates who couldn't be here. So one of her questions was, how do you think your life would have been different if you grew up in a different environment?
I wouldn't have had the same perspective that I have now of being able to relate and empathize deeply with people who've been harmed the most. by the war on drugs. I think there's something that comes from that level of proximity, of being close and really having that direct experience that fully shapes our lives and how we view and how we show up in the world.
And then, how did you handle the emotional and physical abuse growing up? That was her second question.
The physical abuse from the boyfriend?
Yeah, I think that's where she was going.
How did I handle it? It was hard. One, I was very young. You know, I'm 17, 18 years old and just not even sure of myself, you know. And so it was a very confusing time of my life. And I handled it the most just through a strong, deep faith that was instilled in me at a very young age. And because it was such a confusing time of my life and I wasn't being very transparent at all with what was happening. No one even knew what was happening other than my best friend. And it was something I just had to just crawl my way out of, for lack of a better term, and doing it on my own terms and in my own timing, and trusting that my steps were in perfect order. My steps to leave were in perfect order. And so, you know, part of it, I've been asked, you know, why did you stay so long? Why didn't you get out sooner? But it really is because I just trust that my journey is in perfect order.
And then my last question, was it emotionally hard for you to write this novel, like having all the feelings and everything come back?
Yes, it was. It was very emotionally challenging, but it was also therapeutic as well. You know, I think we suppress a lot of emotions that we don't even realize we're suppressing from childhood, especially in early adulthood. And so when you suppress them for so long, it's like just having this deep wound with a scab. And so to write, I had to like not just gently, you know, when you're little, you probably gently pull scabs off, but I had to rip it. And that hurt. But it also produced this beautiful piece of work that many, many people can relate to. Many people can relate to, and I'm hopeful that it also produced just the light for them to know they weren't alone and to know that we can all overcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so heading back to the chat for a little bit, Brandon wants to know, how did facing challenges at a young age help you cope with challenges today?
It definitely gave me tougher skin, that's for sure. But it also gave me just this heightened sense of maturity, this heightened sense of just how different but the same, you know, that we all are. I think we all share much more common ground than we realize, and those challenges, you know, really helped me cope with challenges today. And knowing that everyone has their own struggles and that each and every one of us, you know, is just trying to find our way back home.
Good. We have in the chat, Fallon wants to know why title the book A Knock at Midnight?
Oh, that's a great question. So the book A Knock at Midnight, it is named after a Martin Luther King Jr. sermon called A Knock at Midnight. And the reason I titled the book that is there was a time after I had left corporate where I was just hitting the ground running for clemency and trying to raise awareness and encourage President Obama through the Clemency Now initiative to grant as many people clemency as he could before he left office. And there was a time we had all been in Washington, D.C. with several dozen family members from across the country pleading for their loved ones to be released. And once we got back from D.C., gosh, it probably wasn't even 2 weeks later that there was like several hundred people had been denied clemency. And it was hard because I had just hugged these families and encouraged these families and now their loved ones have been denied, with no chance of applying again through President Obama because he was leaving soon. And this was sometime in November of 2016. And it was just a dark place for me. And my client, Corey Jacobs, he emailed me because in federal prison, they can email through an intranet service called CoreLinks. And he emailed me this sermon, A Knock at Midnight. And he had no idea, what I had been dealing with the past few days. And he emailed me that sermon. He told me to look it up. And he said, you got to stay nourished. And so the sermon is in the sermon, Dr. King uses a parable. He talks about a weary traveler who is hungry and he's in search of bread, and how a man knocks on his neighbor's door at midnight asking for these loaves of bread. And Dr. King says these loaves of bread represent faith, hope, and love. But the neighbor won't answer the door. So the man keeps knocking and he keeps knocking, and the neighbor is like, my children are asleep, go away. And the man keeps knocking and he keeps knocking. But what Dr. King is telling us in the sermon is that the weary traveler who is knocking on his neighbor's door at midnight for those 3 loaves of bread is really seeking the dawn. And Dr. King's eternal message of hope in that sermon is that the dawn will come. And I knew I was going to include that scene in my book about how Corey had sent me the sermon. And so when I was writing, I went back and I listened to the sermon, over and over and over again. And I realized that had been our journey, all of these years, from Sharonda's case to Corey to Chris Young's case. We were knocking at midnight. We were seeking loaves of bread. We were seeking the dawn, and we held on to this hope that dawn would come. And in that moment, I knew this was just going to be the perfect title for the book. I definitely encourage you all to listen to the sermon if you have a chance. It's really good.
Thank you. So, come on. We have a question in house.
Okay.
Hi, how are you? So my question was, how did it feel when you had to leave your sister in the environment that you had to leave her in?
How did it feel what?
How did it feel that you had to leave your sister in that environment?
In that moment, it felt just like a relief. I didn't look at it as leaving her. I looked at it as me running away from something and running to something. Running away from the challenges at home, but running to this new life, with my grandparents and this new life in commerce. The older I got, though, and the more I thought about it as I got older, I felt horribly guilty. I felt, for whatever unreasonable reason, that I just felt guilty, for leaving my sister. I felt if I had stayed, things would have been better for her. If I had stayed, my mother's drug addiction wouldn't have spiraled out of control. If I had stayed, now that I'm more mature at 37, I realized that was just an unfounded responsibility and sense of guilt that I was imposing on myself. But, we're growing up and we're learning along the way. But I definitely felt a lot of guilt later that I probably didn't begin to process fully until I was writing the book. So that's what I mean, definitely, when I say, how therapeutic writing the book was.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Brittany. My name is Francesca. I have 2 questions for you. My first question is, what advice would you give younger Brittany?
Younger Brittany?
Yeah, like 10 years back.
I would tell my younger self to relax, to breathe easy, and know that everything's going to be okay.
And my second question is, what do you think the outcome would have been if younger Brittany went to therapy now that mental health and, everything that's going on in the world right now? what would be the outcome? What do you think would be the outcome?
I really didn't hear the outcome of younger Brittany, and then I didn't hear that.
Sorry. What do you think the outcome could have been if younger Brittany went to therapy?
Went to therapy?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Wow. It would have been an even more remarkable journey. It is something that I'm so glad you asked that question, because it is something that I do think about a lot, even as I go to therapy now as an adult, of just, wow, what if I had these tools as a teenager in elementary school? What if these tools were taught to us during these times where we're enduring trauma, where we're just enduring life? So I think that I would have been able to cope even better if I had have gone to therapy at a younger age and been taught these tools that we need to heal and evolve. I don't think that I know that we're in a lot of communities that we don't even talk about therapy, but I know as an adult just how beneficial that it is when we do heal and when we are operating at the highest level of our best selves. It's just a beautiful thing, and it's something that I wish I would have been exposed to very early on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so back to the chat. Who are your favorite authors?
Oh, that's a great question. God, I have lots of them. So my favorite authors currently are totally most authors from the South. Black authors from the South, like Kiese Layman and his book Heavy. It's really good. He's from Mississippi. Jasmine Ward, her books are poetry. I mean, the stories that she tells are beautiful. Her memoir, Men We Reaped, is a great book. She has another book that actually it's gorgeous. It's called Sing, Unburied Sing. All of her books are great, but she's from Mississippi as well. Sarah Broom, she wrote The Yellow House. Great book. She's from New Orleans. And also, I hadn't read a lot of fiction in a while, but when I was writing my book, towards the end, I started to read more fiction, and I'm so glad that I did. I really miss fiction and didn't realize how much. So Jasmine Ward's Sing, Unburied Sing is fiction, but also Britt Bennett. Her book is definitely really great. She is from Louisiana as well. And yeah, those are my favorite authors now. Of course, there's all-time classic favorites like James Baldwin and Toni Morrison, but there's some really remarkable Black authors from the South that I just wish got more credit.
Thank you. Come on, we have another question from in person here.
Oh, and Britt Bennett's book, it's called The Vanishing Half. Sorry, I didn't say the name of her book, but it's good.
Hi, my name is Milton, and I actually have two questions. One, if you could do anything different in your past, what would it be? And two, why did you choose to deal with, like, when you chose to move out all your abusive ex's stuff out of your place, why did you choose to handle it that way?
So, would I have done anything different? I struggle with that question sometimes because, part of it is like, no, I wouldn't have done anything different. But yeah, I would have. I would have definitely followed my mother's advice of not being in that relationship from the get-go. So I would have listened more. I would have definitely have followed my dad's advice, you know, to go to college away, to really expose myself to this vast world among us. So I think for the crux of it, I would have listened to my parents more. And the second part of your question, why did I decide to leave in that way? I don't know. I think it was just easiest for me in that moment. I was young. I was not very close to home, and so the best time for me to really just kick him to the curb was when he was gone and not there. So it just felt like the best time.
Thank you. Okay. Well, Brittany, I have a couple of questions myself.
Okay.
All right. So I'm very interested in your Girls Embracing Mothers initiative. I think that's absolutely amazing. And yeah, no, and I was looking at some of the stats in New Jersey for incarcerated women. So there's been an increase of 348% for women in jail in New Jersey from 1980 to 2017. And then an increase of 291% in prison in New Jersey. And so with the initiative you have in Texas, I was wondering, are there any thoughts of expanding upon that? Because we need that in New Jersey.
Yes, we are absolutely looking to expand the initiative at Girls Embracing Mothers. It's a nonprofit that I started for young girls whose mothers are incarcerated in Texas. And we've partnered the past 9 years now with Texas Women's Prisons, taking girls in for prison visits with their moms every single month. We are in a visitation room to ourselves. We get to bring in food, eat lunch with the moms. We do art therapy. And we always cover a curriculum that revolves around critical life issues, and really just work to break the cycle and build the bond, and doing it in a way where we're empowering and amplifying the voices of women and girls who've been impacted by the system. And so the program is very scalable, and we have been looking to expand. I think we're going to expand first to another state in the South, and then we're always looking for other states to expand to as well. I would be very curious, and I'm going to make myself a note for our team to look into it, of how receptive New Jersey is for outside programs to come in, because the program is so scalable. You know, we're actually in hopes over the next 6 to 9 months that we will have a scalability plan in place, even that we could share with others to be able to implement the program in their area. So I'll be sure to keep you in the loop on all of that.
Thank you so much. And a second question I have for you is that I'm always, trying to give my students tools for motivation, right? At a community college, that's particularly an issue. How to keep them racing towards the finish line. So what would you say was your greatest motivating factor, right, after everything you've been through, to become an attorney, an activist, a social justice warrior, all that you are?
One of the motivating factors, I think there were a few, but one of them was failure, the fear of failing. I just was terrified by it, honestly. So that was very motivating for me. Also, of knowing that I could do it. My dad always taught me just the power of our minds and how powerful the words we feed ourselves and others really are. And so by even just having that click in your mind that you can do anything, really, you can do anything. And it just starts with that manifestation of freedom, of believing that you can. And as I mentioned before, freedom is so multidimensional, and just remembering the freedom that comes from higher education, the freedom that comes from being able to expand the vastness of the jobs you're able to get, of being able to expand your consciousness and your knowledge base to go and become entrepreneurs or to go and work at other companies. There's just so much freedom that we all need. You know, we are all in this carceral state in so many ways. And so I just work to really pursue freedom always and always. And so that motivation comes from there. So, and also from family. So fear, freedom, and family. And that is from my grandpa. I'm gonna share another story with y'all from my grandpa. And I talk about it in the book too, but we would go fishing. They had a pond in front of their home. And I would just remember being a teenager and just venting to my grandpa about my teenage woes. And he would listen to me so intently. And he would say, "It ain't nothing but a step for a stepper, big girl. You just got to keep on stepping." And so as you're in college, you know, just to remember that this ain't nothing but a step for a stepper. You just got to keep on stepping and get through it.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you for that. Now, I just want to make sure that there are no other questions. Yeah. All right. So we have Dr. Meeks is going to come and ask a question.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I actually wanted to share a question that one of my students brought up this morning, and it was related to GEM and how you were able to, at such a young age, just suddenly found a nonprofit. I mean, they were sort of stunned, and we were reading the book, and you sort of went through that pretty quickly. All of a sudden, like, GEM just existed. So they wanted to know, how did you do that? I mean, because it's been so extraordinary, the wonderful impact that you have had on individuals and thus on systems as well. But starting from things like GEM, how did you do it?
Thank you. Thank you for even acknowledging GEM. You know, it's my baby, truly. And for me, it started because there were no nonprofits in my area doing the work. I never wanted to start a nonprofit, honestly. I wanted to go volunteer at a nonprofit that was doing similar work or really empowering girls with mothers in prison or children with parents in prison. And so I just started searching in Dallas to find a nonprofit to go volunteer at, and there were none. And so I created my own, and I did it through a way, well, I was in law school at the time that I really got serious about it, and I took a nonprofit law course. And in the course, all of the students have to create like a dummy nonprofit and go through the motions of filing the paperwork. And so I asked the professor, I said, I want to start a real nonprofit, and can I use this course to apply? And he said yes. And so I used what he taught in that course to apply to become a nonprofit. And then from there, gosh, when I think about it, I don't even know. You know, I just went through the motions of doing what I felt I was supposed to do, you know, and knowing I needed a board of directors and thinking through, okay, who should I get on the board of directors? I didn't just want anyone on the board of directors. I wanted people who had experience with criminal justice, who had experience with social work, you know, experience with accounting for our treasurer. And so I don't even talk about this in the book, I don't think, but I went to different college professors' pages on the internet and the local colleges in the Dallas area. And I said, okay, I know I want a social worker. So I went to the School of Social Work and looked at the professors. I went to the School of Criminal Justice and looked at criminology professors. And I just randomly emailed several of them about having a meeting with me so I could tell them about this nonprofit I wanted to start. And one of them, you know, most of them couldn't, they're at capacity, you know, but most of them would meet with me at least for a few minutes, even if they couldn't serve on the board. And so I went to one college, University of Texas at Arlington, and the criminology professor, it wasn't really her expertise with women, and she was slim, but she said, there's a new professor who started, this was in 2009 or 10, she said, there's a new professor who started who's really going to specialize in women and justice. And her name was Jaya Davis. And she walked me down the hall, and Jaya just happened to be in her office, and she just believed in the vision from day one, you know. And so it really showed to me the power of just taking the chance. You know, not everyone's going to say yes. Most people aren't going to say yes, you know, but really just visualizing what you want, having it written down on paper, and then just taking whatever steps you can to make it happen. And for me, it was these random emails to total strangers trying to get feedback, you know, and guidance.
Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more for the chat. One more from the chat. So Victoria, she says that she loves your comment about that freedom is multidimensional, and her question is, how would you define freedom in its most basic form?
Oh wow, that's a great question. So Victoria, the definition of freedom continues to evolve for me. 10 years ago, freedom in its basic form to me, as it relates to the work that I do, would be getting people out of prison. And I realized that freedom is much more than just getting people from behind those walls. I think freedom in its most basic form, it's a hard question because I look at freedom, even in its most basic form, like love. Like, you can't define love. How do you define love? You can't put a box around love, you know. And I look at freedom as through the same lens as that. If I had to put some words to it, I would say the most basic form is freedom of your mind. And that goes to just really working to transform those self-limiting beliefs that we place on ourselves, and understanding just the true liberation that comes through our minds and how that will manifest into life.
Thank you. So we have a question in the chat here from Jose, our director of the Academic Learning Center. And he wants to know, what advice do you have for our students?
I would tell all the students to dream your biggest dream, to dream big, to believe in yourself, and to be sure that as you're going through this journey of this thing we call life, to really be sure to search deep within yourself for many of the answers to questions that you may have. I think we are so powerful just as human beings, and that ability to be able to tap within ourselves and our own intuitive beliefs is just a lot more powerful than you think. And doing that all with the overarching premise of just continuing to dream.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to bring back Dr. Sande.
Brittany, I just wanted to thank you again for being with us today and answering so many student questions. We really appreciated
This was remarkable. I loved all of the questions. And someone's asking me about the favorite book, so I'll type those into the chat.
Thank you, thank you. And also, thank you so much. You know, I just appreciate how open and welcoming that you've been through this whole process. From that first message on Instagram, it's awesome. And of course, as Dr. Sandy says, your interaction with our students has been amazing. Thank you again so very much. We are so grateful and so honored to have you. And we'll be in touch, right? Absolutely.
Awesome.
I'm looking forward to that initiative.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank y'all. Bye.